So it's a great privilege to be here today and moderate a panel of people with such rich experience in the music industry and to talk about what I think is a really exciting topic right now, an incredibly vibrant time for digital music. And as I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking about my own experiences in Asia, and I remembered just over 15 years ago, I was asked by the company I worked for, which was a company that distributed music on television, but also online, to go to Asia and see what opportunities were there. And I met an executive at a major record label and started to present to him what our product could do in Asia, and he stopped me midstream. Excuse the pun. He stopped me midstream and said, actually, I'm going to stop you there. There's so much piracy in this region, and it's so difficult to make money that actually I think you're probably going to be wasting your time. And then he said, do you want to go for a beer? Which I thought at 10 o'clock was a bit strong, actually. But, you know, and now when I look at where we are in the industry and some of the incredible success we're having, with consumers engaging and paying for music, it's such an incredible turnaround in the last, 15 years, and especially the last 5 years. So we're going to start with some of the easy questions. Hopefully we will make it a bit more difficult as we go along. But I'm going to start with Chee, Meng, and I'm going to ask you, I think you set up the Spotify operation here and in Singapore. What do you think have been the big changes in the industry that have driven some of the success that everyone's having?
Right. Yes, thanks for that. I think we can go back to the piracy conversation that you spoke about. If we go back to Stockholm, Sweden, really was where Pirate Bay was, and that's really where I think Daniel and Martin really thought about how do we tackle this problem. And the way to do it really is to what is better than pirated content or pirated product. So we really kind of started from there. And about 6 years ago, when we first launched in Asia, we had the same kind of mindset and rolling out all the music available in the world better than any of the pirated products that's out there. And making it better through recommendation, for example. Making the discovery experience a lot better. And that really start to set us apart from all the others pirated products, but the quality of the audio may be bad. We spoke about the latency stuff, So again, just making sure that the product is actually way better than what is out there. And that is really one of the key reasons why we have been able to grow very, very strongly over the years. And if you look at the IFPI numbers, over the past 5 years or so, every single market that we have launched, the country has returned back to positive growth. And in the last 3 years or so, that growth is actually accelerating. It's growing faster than ever. Right. So that is really something that has been different over the last couple of years.
Right, and I'm not sure how familiar people are with the numbers, but the Global Music Report last year that IFPI published, streaming revenue grew 38.2% in the Asia Pacific region. The Philippines grew by 24.3%, China by 26.5%, but the one that really jumped out at me was India with 60.8% streaming growth. So, Ali, you've been working with JioSaavn for some years now. What do you think, what's caused this dramatic explosion in the past year, do you think?
There's been a general change in the consumption habits of Indian users. The fact that data has become affordable. There's a tipping point that we all identify a date, a month rather, September 2016. And that's when Reliance Jio, who had invested a rather sizable amount in building out a fiber optic infrastructure throughout India, they turned on the switch and created this new telco called Reliance Jio, and they gave away data for free. So 4G data, you sign up, you get it for free, unlimited use. you can imagine the kind of change there was. I mean, at that point, we were another DSP amongst other DSPs in India, and suddenly we saw this huge uptick in our streaming, and we were like, wow, this is insane. And then suddenly everyone's consumption habits changed. I mean, we went from a point where in 2015, a gigabyte of data cost $4.25. Today, it's 26 cents per gigabyte. In India, it's the second cheapest in the world. India has one of the largest per capita consumptions of video content digitally, and it's this particular moment, September 2016, was the onset of that. And not only did it change, everyone's access to data, but it changed the kind of music, for example, the repertoire. You'll notice an uptick in Anglo repertoire, where it had, in 2014, 3-4% of our overall market share was Anglo. Now it's close to 20. Wow. And that is, again, as the world becomes smaller as they have access to data, because pre-2016, I would send a WhatsApp to someone and I'd have to wait because they'd turn on data, wait for that, and then turn it off, reply, and then turn it back on. It was crazy. So I think that is, if there's a moment of change, that's it. It's September 2016.
I mean, I read somewhere that Southeast Asia has 600 million people, which is around 10% of the world's population, but less than 20% of those with a smartphone actually stream music. So is your sense that this is just the beginning and this is going to continue? Is that the trend that you guys are seeing?
I would like to believe that. And I think actually if the numbers hold true, yes, they are consuming more music. They are engaging with platforms, whether it be ours or any of our other colleagues in the DSP space, I think the battle for us is more about, obviously this is entirely the monetization issue, but yes, they are spending more time. They are engaging. Overall, all the particular metrics that we refer to are up, but there are definitely some challenges that lie ahead.
Well, we're going to talk about those challenges in a bit. Rene, you are based in Japan. You work for Amazon in Japan. Japan, a very traditionally still a tangible market in many ways. How have you found setting up, getting going in the region, and what have been some of the things that have helped drive growth and consumption for you?
Well, so first of all, I think it's interesting you mentioned looking 5 years back. If you actually look 5 years back in Japan, there were almost no streaming services available in the country. Most of the international services and the local services started in mid 2015 or later. So just looking 5 years back, you're at an industry that is exclusively physical and downloads essentially. That's changed quite a bit. It's still by a wide margin the largest physical market segment in the world. I think 72% of revenues last year were still physical. I think worldwide that's just about 25%. So there's obviously a huge gap there. But what we've seen over the last year or so since I got to Japan is definitely that artists, labels, customers start embracing streaming much more than they've done before. The way Amazon in general has looked at growing the market is at reaching new types of audiences and customer demographics. We truly believe that creating as many ingress points into paid subscription services is really important. And when we launched Prime Music a few years ago, that was one of the ways where we were able to really broaden this market segment by reaching slightly older demographics, families, much more than sort of early adopters and younger consumers. And that, the way we can do this is by just leveraging our big retail customer base that we have at Amazon. And that's been quite successful in Japan as well as around the world. And we're looking forward to continue to do that.
Right. I mean, for those of us old enough to remember, Amazon has been in digital music for a very long time, right? It had one of the very first download services, was the first company to really try and disrupt pricing a little bit in the West. Just out of interest, how many people here don't have an Alexa? Okay, wow. Maybe a bit too shy to put your hand up, but I mean, it's incredible penetration, right?
The other thing I would add is, yes, so relatively long history in downloads, but then also an even longer history in selling physical music, right, which was the second category at Amazon after books. So there's incredible wealth of data that we have that, as we build our streaming services, we can use and leverage to really build a customized product.
So moving on to you, Charles, if you look at this from a label perspective, and we were speaking earlier about how Merlin has been incredibly active in exploring markets around the world and has found great success for its members by doing that. Is your sense that repertoire and catalog is becoming discovered and artists are becoming much more prolific in different countries due to this increase in streaming?
Yeah, I think if we look back to where you started, where I did a similar thing to you back when I ran a physical distributor, which has come to this region and try and set up an independent distribution network. And this is in the 90s, in the mid-90s. And not only was there the piracy issue, but there was just this lack of confidence that any diversity of music was actually going to be worth investing in.
Right.
And very early on in the Merlin journey, once when Spotify was the very first deal we did, and we, then did deals with Deezer and YouTube and all these other platforms, is the thing that immediately struck us was that the actual availability of a global catalog on a regional basis had fundamentally changed listener behavior. So all of a sudden, this generation that had access for the first time to this world catalogs of music was behaving very differently to the way the physical marketplace had listened. So the listening of a catalog broadened very quickly. We saw that first in Brazil and Latin America and Mexico, and we're seeing very, very similar patterns here. So I think the consumer experience of having, a convenient, user-friendly, and attractively priced product that actually got you to all of that music very quickly and legitimately meant that all of a sudden the consumption of the type of music that was happening region by region really broadened. And we still see now it's not just a colonial kind of imposition of Western content into these emerging markets. It's music from those markets cross-pollinating into others. So I think as much as the legitimizing of the industry has sort of created some of this growth, the opportunity for artists and labels to get to a global marketplace and finding a global marketplace that's actually hungry for their music, I think it's fundamentally changed the shape of the business.
What do you as a kind of rights owner look for from services like these guys when you think about discovery and how you want to surface different repertoire on the services? What kind of things do you like to see them do?
Look, I think in some ways the other thing we learned very early on is the traditional retail model. So whether it was the Amazon download store or the Apple iTunes store was very much constructed like a physical record store. So you had your front page and you had your charts and your new releases, and it was very, I suppose old world in terms of the way it presented itself. With the emergence of streaming platforms, and I think the architecture of services like Spotify from the beginning, that just ignored that whole dynamic and basically said, look, here's the world of music, here's your starting point, now you can navigate and we'll help you through playlists. I think that really opened up the audience in ways that we hadn't seen before. So the catch cry of independence globally was always, if only I could get onto the radio, if only I could get into that record store, people would love to hear this music, but the barriers to entry were so high. So in some ways we've been pleased and excited by that immediate broadening of accessibility to all of that music, and the personalization of it means that it doesn't really matter now that in the physical market or in the early parts of the download market, there was purchasable real estate to get your music featured. So the front window of the record shop cost the record companies money, and it was only the record companies that had the money to spend on buying the front window of the record shop that could afford to feature their artists. Now it's become much more of a meritocracy. So people get fed new music all the time. If you like it, you add it to a collection, you thumbs it up, whatever the various tools are you can that bring it in. And so we see, again, distinctly different consumption patterns for us. So what we sort of tend to say is, don't try and recreate those old models, because those old models were limiting not only for the consumer but for us as independent rights holders. So we really look for that, ease of discovery, easily accessible, good curation, people getting the right songs put in front of the right consumers, and the services that do that best is where we perform the best. So it's been a very exciting sort of dynamic to witness evolve.
From my point of view, the change of that customer journey, it's been one of the most exciting developments for artists, and the biggest opportunities for artists as well, right? When you look historically, discovery, purchase, and consumption, those were like three different distinct stages, right? You might have discovered a song on the radio, you purchased it in the record store, and then you played it at home. Now all that happens on one platform, and those platforms are global. So that offers artists like very different opportunities all of a sudden to reach new audiences. And I think I'm probably speaking for all of us. That is one of the core tasks that we see and missions that we have to really enable artists to, on the one hand, find new audiences when they're up and coming, and young artists, as well as sort of helping established artists grow their audiences, and that's super exciting.
I think, really, to your point, right? Streaming enables that to happen. It truly becomes a global marketplace, and it's not the traditional way of like West moving into the East, right? If you look at K-pop, there's the perfect example. Like I think, pre-streaming, that would have been, really quite different, quite difficult. But if you look at K-pop today, it's a legitimate global genre. What a year for K-pop this year, right? BTS, Blackpink at Coachella, right? The army in the BTS fans in India, of course, even, right? So that changes the game. So the music is starting to move, not the traditional way of West to East. Although that still happens. If you look at Taylor or Ariana, the Philippines alone would have been easily, the top streaming city. But we are also seeing a lot of repertoire, a lot of artists connecting with new fans across different continents. Some of them you not even think of. Like Mexico City is, one of the biggest market for K-pop. Right. So that platform allowing that global marketplace certainly changes the business for us in our part of the world as well.
But we still need to have a little bit of, we need to measure there is a reality check that we need to be sort of aware of. I mean, it's great that we've created this universe of available music, but the fact is a very large percentage of songs streamed on our platform are comprised of 1,000 songs. That's it. Right. I'm not going to go into the exact number, but it's enough where there are moments where we pause and say, well, why do we have 50 million tracks under license?
But what is interesting for us, though, is...
but it's important just to have it there. The point is, that's the thing. It has to be having that diversity is absolutely important. Having that entire body of repertoire, Anglo, Indian, devotional, regional, Punjabi, whatever, Bhojpuri, doesn't matter. It has to be there. It has to be available. It has to be part of that entire discourse and that narrative on our platform. Sometimes it doesn't. You have to wonder if it makes business sense, but it just does. For us, it's one of those things that has to be there.
Right. I think I read somewhere that more than 80% of the streaming activity is generated by, I think it's under 20%. I don't know whether that is a real figure.
Not really. I think, at least on Spotify, you start to see the consumption actually, carries through to Charles's point, right? Whether it's personalization or recommendation or curated through editorial. I think to your point about that 50 million tracks that we have on each of our service, the consumption has certainly actually increased. The diversity of the artists and repertoire certainly has broadened. So that's something that we continue to push forward to, because it's just the users actually get educated on a lot of new genres, new sound, and they continue to push on that discovery process.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, Charles.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think there's a point on this that, again, particularly from an independent label perspective, that we've seen and we got excited about very early on in the streaming evolution is, the perceived wisdom of the music industry was that 90% of the value is in the top 200 or 300 titles, and certainly record retail stores ran like that. And then there was what they called the long tail.
Right.
And I think what we did, the minute we started analysing this and we actually started getting data out, is there's a whole new category that is driving an enormous amount of consumption that wasn't before, which is what we call, the belly of the beast. So yes, there's huge volumes at the top, and the top 200 tracks still generate eye-watering levels of streams. But that next layer down, between the 200 and the 2,000 or 3,000, whatever it is driving much, much more value to the industry than it ever did in the download world, or even in the physical world. So this is the actual shape of the value chain is changing.
I find it particularly exciting for catalog, right? Not necessarily the long tail, but catalog titles. If I'm looking at Prime Music, which is a curated service, right? So we have 2 million tracks in that service, and that's mostly catalog, mostly tracks that are 6 months old or older than that. And there's a big audience for that content out there, right? It's like the more mainstream listeners that don't necessarily need the new release the day it comes out, right? People that traditionally have listened to the radio mostly, and for them, a curated service like that has a strong set of playlists and curated content for them to listen to, that's perfectly fine for many customers, and they engage with that content, quite significantly.
One thing I just wanted to say, that as a big fan of sort of avant-garde, weird jazz and stuff, I always said to myself, the Japanese have the best taste. They really do. They literally they're the only ones who would consistently sell out Bill Laswell songs, Bill Laswell shows, and I'm just curious, does that reflect in the kind of, didn't mean to hijack your.
No, go.
But what kind of consumption habits have you noticed that is that reflective in the streaming market share? Are they listening to really cool shit?
We definitely, if we look at consumption across countries, we see significant differences, right? I mean, of course, there's local genres, like in Japan, anime, J-pop, video game music, much more popular there. But we also see that jazz, classical varies a lot by country. So that tends to be much more popular in Japan than it is in the US, for example. So
it translates over.
Yes, and we definitely see that, and we definitely try to when we look at our curated content, reflect that in what we're doing.
How do you guys think about programming? So there's one of the most common things I hear from artists in the earliest stages of their career, that all they really want to know is, how am I going to get on the front of the service? How am I going to surface within the product or the DSP? I mean, Meng, I would say Spotify has been responsible, certainly in the West at least, for breaking some artists, particularly in the early days when the ad-supported service, I'm very careful not to use the word free there, but the ad-supported service was so accessible and was effectively instrumental in quashing piracy. How do you guys think about programming these days with just this vast amount of tracks, and you're covering so many different countries? So in this region, how do you think about that?
Actually, first of all, the principle hasn't really changed from day one, which is really personalization, right? But obviously, we operate, and again, everyone must have heard, by now, Asia is not one single market. What we run out of Singapore is very diverse, very hyper-localized markets. And so it really is the beauty of combining machine learning with all the data that we have. Plus, we have a whole team of local editors, an editorial team that actually then looks through all the data, understanding the market nuances. And obviously, we do a lot of work together with our label partners, our artist community. So it's really a combination of all that. But the key here really is programming for the specific market, and then we dive into a further personalized experience. If you wake up in Vietnam, for example, as a user, and you fire your Spotify on Monday morning, you'll get 30 of those brand new songs on your Discover Weekly, completely personalized for you. So there's a lot of kind of thinking between the machine learning and the human curation that we have the best of both worlds.
And do you guys see some counterintuitive trends? So as you're looking, is it pretty much as you expect it to be, or what are some of the things that surprise you, with this explosion of new users? Are there things that are coming out that just are unexpected, and how is that reflected on the service?
No, I think we live in this day and age where the attention span is really, really short. We talk a lot about viral. Right? Anything can explode, whether it's through social media, which actually plays a really key role in a lot of this virality. So it can actually happen from anywhere. It could be a catalog track, just because someone just made a funny video on YouTube or something. So again, it can, in this day and age, it really comes from anywhere. And the key here really is our ability to respond to that very, very quickly. And the signals from the data is going to say one thing. At the same time, having the finger on the pulse through the editorial team or everyone else, we make sure that we keep an eye on all those possible trends or viral trends.
So we can't have just all good news on this panel, especially given that everyone's going to go and have a drink probably afterwards. So, Ali, you mentioned some challenges, and in your mind, as you look to the next 5 years, what are some of the challenges that you see for your service?
There are obviously many challenges. Some of the ones that stand out, and this is just to ensure that we maintain, that we are ultimately an ongoing concern years from now, is that blend of ad-supported and free, and converting those on the ad-supported tier, which are 98% or so, to the paid tier.
Right.
There's an inherent, there's this desire to create value in a service and that is otherwise not really tangible. The Indians don't have much value for time. So we don't place, you can, typically when we're negotiating a deal with a content licensor, they're like, oh, well, we want you to take on all of these particular strategies for this portfolio of things to do to increase that conversion rate. Like, so increase ad load, stream caps, this, that, and the other. And I'm looking at them like, man, this is so myopic. Because truth be told, we have to have a nuanced approach to the Indian user. The Indian user doesn't have any value for time. So you can add all the ads in the world, so he doesn't care. He's not going to care.
Right.
But there will be a point when it will make a difference. That's when, when you create a sense of value for your own time, you create a sense of value for the time spent on this platform. That's what we try to create, sort of that emotional connection. We try to provide, it's not just a service, but it's actually a lifestyle. I know it sounds absolutely crazy, but JioSaavn is in a really unique position in that regard because we have the tailwind that Reliance Industries provides. Reliance has 6,500 retail centers that have all these other products, broadband, set-top boxes. I mean, the entire thing that they've said, engage this, use these tools, empower yourself, let's do this in a way that ensures ubiquity. So the challenges are obviously just that spending time learning, addressing the particular nuanced concerns that affect the Indian user, such as frictionless payment gateways. It seems really, but that actually makes a difference, that kind of thing. At the same time, we had, when I was here yesterday for the Tencent presentation, I have to admit, I drool in envy, the idea of the Indian government and us collectively working together to deal with piracy. I'm not saying that in fact, they're far ahead, they're ahead of us in terms of trying to figure out how to address these issues. But at least in the Indian ecosystem, I'm looking forward to the day where like all the DSPs and labels work together to address this, because we are all beneficiaries. These are just some of the things that, like, some of the challenges that we're addressing. But yeah,
it's an interesting point you raised there, right? Which is, you know, I've been in enough content licensing conversations over the years, acting for services who are getting licenses, and there's a real pressure, you know, for good reason,
yeah,
to
totally,
go and,
it's
hey,
totally legitimate.
We want to convert this non-paying user to be a paying user, and certainly the user functionality and the proposition and everything else that is delivered in this region is so significantly different from what you would see, say, in North America.
Actually, I can add to that. I think the onus is actually on us, right? So we build out a product. It could be a Ferrari that is fit for the roads for the US. But then, you know, you port it over to our part of the world, you know, perhaps it's a left-hand drive. So my point being, the important thing is to make sure that the product fits the market. And our part of the world is diverse, the local nuances, the product actually has to fit and make sense for the user, whether it's payment gateways, right? You know, a lot of the countries that we operate in are still pretty much a cash-based economy. So how do we the propensity to pay is there, but probably not through credit cards, you know. So again, it's making sure that the product actually fits. And another example could be, we noticed actually there has been a lot of installing and uninstalling and reinstalling and that kind of stuff. I'm like, what is going on? You know, they like the product, but why are they uninstalling? And you know, do a bit of study, and it's like, hey, you know, isn't it obvious? There are a lot of smart devices, but they were rolled out in about like 5 years ago. They can't, you know, they just can't support the full experience. And our job is to make sure that we have, you know, say a light version, you know, that actually runs the way that a premium product or a full-on product will run as well on a lower-end smartphone, because that's what the market needs, that's what the market demands. So I think the onus is actually on us to make adjustment to the product to fit the market.
What I think we don't do enough of, and we started doing this recently, just on-ground customers research. People who churn out, call them up like, hey, why'd you leave? And I know it's like mind-blowing, like how, you know, but it's such a basic thing, like, and we've started doing that and started getting answers and started understanding, that's what you hate about this, that's what you hate about this, that's what you, instead of waiting for them to just write, you know, reviews. No, we just go out there and really engage with them. And did you create this dialogue? And you're like, all right, so this is localize, to his point, localize your product, localize the solution, not just impose it.
And I think that what's an important point there is just to acknowledge that if you're looking ahead 5 years, this industry will be in a very different phase than it is now. We're still in this sort of hyper-growth phase. 5 years from now, there will be individual countries where the growth will have started to flatten out quite significantly. So I think with that, there is a change from this acquiring customers as quickly as possible to engaging, retaining them. And I think that's where I think all the services still have a lot to learn. You know, what drives a customer to cancel a subscription versus to staying, right? And that's an area where we, for example, invest a lot in right now to just understand those dynamics better.
Yeah. Charles, as you hear this and you think about you know, the various outlets you have for your members' music in the region, are there things that you wish that the DSPs did more of?
Look, I think there's some structural issues around the markets that I think are very difficult and need to be overcome at some point. You know, this notion that no one wants to pay for music in the market, I think that sort of myth has been disproven by what's happened in Brazil. But if you think about, I mean, for us, Brazil is our number 6 highest earning territory. For the independent sector, Brazil was never number 6 at anything other than maybe piracy. Right, or losing value. So this market where supposedly it was all free and easy and no one wanted to pay for everything and everything was free, you put the right products in front of the right people with the right plans and the right pricing and the right localization, people will pay for things. And obviously, economically, as Meng says, I don't think we can talk about Asia because the level of purchasing power across the region, territory by territory, varies markedly. But we're encouraged by the growth that we see. I think there's an additional issue in this region is the dominance that a very big video global service has been allowed to exert.
I don't know who you mean.
in offering all of the music all of the time for free to everyone at a point where it's very difficult to differentiate as a consumer, what is it that you're paying for? If I can get all of this stuff over here for free with a few ads in the middle, why should I go and pay one of these people to have their music? And I think that finding better ways to differentiate the products in those markets, and to me it's ironic, we even ignoring the dominance of that service in some of the more emerging markets. We look at Japan, and you look at how resistant some of the traditional record industry in Japan has been to the entrance of streaming services. And you said it was 2015 and 16, which, considering Japan used to be the #2 music market in the world, seems insane. If you just look at it from pure economics. But on the one hand, we had these you had these very big, powerful rights holders resisting putting their music onto streaming platforms, and at the same time, all of that music was available for free on the video platform. So again, and this is, I think, an industry-wide and a problem we'd want to work on with our partners, is how do you better define that value proposition? Like, what is it that you're paying for? What's the difference in the experience, and how does it all play into it? And and to be fair, that video service is now launching its own subscription service and is adding its own value. But I think that ecosystem is very delicate, and the countries that get it right really get it right. And the countries that struggle, or where the things are too far out of balance, concern us, because we think there's probably lost value for everyone on those platforms. So it's but I think what you say is right. The maturity of the market and the ubiquity and the availability of these services, and dealing with things like the cost of data in a market, or the availability of the right kind of payment platforms, are all things we do. But we've got tangible evidence now in Brazil and Mexico, and increasingly Argentina and Chile, that markets that people considered emerging are actually now significant revenue drivers for the industry. And I don't see why this region, as it evolves, will be any different to that.
So as a lawyer and also a fan of Leicester City, I'm a big believer in winners and losers. Do you think, and I'm expecting quite a conciliatory response here, but do you guys think that with such headroom for growth, there's going to be room for everybody to coexist, and you're going to see a multitude of services? Or do you think that you may see what you're seeing in some countries in Europe, where a particular service will be very dominant? What's your sense of how that's going to play out?
I can go. No, I think competition is great, right? The tide floats all boats. The more it keeps everyone honest, and the more players there are, the quicker the market is going to adopt and embrace streaming. To your point, we are barely scratching the surface. We are just getting started. There's still so much room to grow, and the more players, we are on something right if there are so many people doing it, right? Investing in growing the market together. So I think the more competitors are, the more services, the more choices that the user have, the quicker the market is going to embrace streaming as a format.
Rene, is that how you guys see the world?
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for multiple services. I don't know what the right number of services is. I know that you have to have a strong funnel into your service to really be able to grow the service to a certain extent, that you have to do. I can definitely see that you have global services that coexist with some more local services. Again, it's kind of hard to predict at this point what the right number is and how this will develop at the end, but I'm pretty confident there will be more than one or two services.
Right. And what about this idea? I mean, we've heard it thematically a little bit in the last couple of days, but what about this idea that some of the services here are going to go out and really start having some real success in North America and other Western countries? How do you see that playing out? I want to ask you that, Ali, given that I know you spend a bit of your time in New York and also in India.
I obviously see that, certainly in North America. Going back to your earlier question about India, though, there is, right now, the Indian streaming marketplace is quite crowded, and I do see some consolidation in the future, absolutely. I don't think there's room for that many services, especially that many regional, local services in a market of that. So this, notwithstanding the size and scale. But you know, there's, people often ask, what do you think about Spotify coming into India? And I was like, well, first of all, they're best in class.
Right.
Yeah, it's a gold standard when they're from a product point of view. And I love it. I love the fact that they're coming in, because it helps all of us raise our game. But they have some real challenges ahead, because this is not, we've walked this walk for 9 years, and we know this is not North American. This is a very unique, nuanced market that requires a very unique, nuanced approach, from whether it be a product point of view, pricing, marketing, the entire editorial, the entire 360. And yeah, definitely there's room for consolidation in India. Definitely, it's going to happen.
So given that we're coming up to the end of the session, I want to take the opportunity, given that all of you on the panel have such great experience in digital music, to give me, if you may, just one wild or kind of out there prediction of what you think is going to happen in the next 5 years in this region in digital music. What's the one crazy thing that either you think may happen or would be exciting to see happen?
I mean, I think we're going to see significantly global, successful artists coming out of markets that you would never have thought they would come out of when you look at the way the music industry traditionally has created stars. I mean, I think, having spent some time in India recently, I mean, that's an incredibly vibrant music scene there. And if we just look at how our music is traveling from the labels that we represent, and, this is still early days, but the fact that, I was talking with one of our Malaysian companies we work with yesterday, and 65% of their streaming activity comes from outside of Malaysia. Our Japanese labels, 55% of their streaming activity comes from outside of Japan. Now, some of that is diaspora, and some of that is communities around the world. But I don't see any reason why in a market like this that's this open that we won't see a fundamental shift in where hit or superstar product comes from.
And do you think, sorry, I'm going to ask you a further question. Do you think that the major labels, because I know your members are largely, the independent labels, do you think the major labels are set up for that, or does that represent a huge opportunity for your guys?
I think they are set up for that, but I also think it's a great opportunity. I don't think it matters nowadays necessarily where the seed is planted. I think it's where that seed grows from. And, we've had lots of examples of, globally successful artists coming from outside of the major label system. I mean, the BTS story, the Adele story. I mean, there's a growing list of artists that are coming from outside of the major label system. But, the genius of the majors is creating global superstars. Right. And I think they have a global footprint, and they'll read that. But I just think the opportunity is more open to a broader set of people, and whoever's best at it will win, rather than whoever's the biggest.
Rene, what do you think?
So I mentioned this initially, that in Japan obviously is still a very physical market. More than 70% of revenues are still physical. So I'd love to see 5 years from now that sort of streaming has overtaken the physical side of the business.
How far off do you think that is in Japan?
It's super hard to tell, I think, because me being in Germany for quite a few years before Amazon here in Japan, it's a very similar market where over an extended period of time you had physical declines, but especially in the global context, fairly limited, and the physical market was very strong up until a year and a half ago, where all of a sudden the decline really accelerated and you reached a certain tipping point. And I think that is the big question in Japan. When is that tipping point going to be reached, where the growth in streaming is really going to accelerate and the decline in physical is going to also just going to accelerate? I think there's good reasons to believe that this is going to happen within the 5 years. Right. Is that enough for streaming to overtake physical? I don't know. But we're seeing we're seeing more and more artists now streaming. We still have a high number of holdout artists that are not streaming. We see that happening. That feels like it's accelerating. There's a lot of momentum. So I'm quite hopeful overall.
Chee, Meng, you've been at it for 6-7 years now. You set up Spotify's operation here. Mm-hmm. What's the wildest thing that could happen in the next 5 years?
The wildest thing, I don't know. It's actually not that wild. I think there's a lot of work in that whole AI space, across the world. So I won't be surprised if we start to see a lot of AI-assisted musical work.
AI music, a lawyer's dream.
It could be, it's not that far off. It's not that far-fetched, I think. That could be an interesting one to watch, there's so many directions that this could possibly go. But AI-assisted creation could be something that is quite interesting. And then it allows the subgenres, whether it's, I don't know, when you talk about Japan, anime comes out. Again, whether that will follow the sort of K-pop story of, starting off as a subculture, but really resonating with, connecting with different fans around the world. So a bit of both.
We were speaking about AI just before this panel, and the conversation got quite scary, so we had to change the topic. Alan, what about you?
In 5 years, I will be paying probably $50 for my family plan on Spotify. I will be, and I won't care. And I'll be like, all right, I like the product. JioSaavn will not be known as solely a music streaming service. It'll be the entire value chain, from creator to consumer, the entire value chain. That's.
I mean, 50 a month.
It's
a criminal to say this.
I
say to my kids, you get the world's music for like $10 a month. It's insane, absolutely insane.
I have a hard time convincing the Indian user to pay $5 a year for that.
Right. So look, I mean, I think we'll leave it there, and I could carry on this conversation for hours. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming and participating and being so open. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.